Hey, welcome everybody to AI News and Gurus, the show for intelligent distributors. My name is Brian Hopkins, and I'll be joined today with my co-host Brooks Hamilton and a special guest, Tracy Spangenberg. So we're really excited to talk with you about today's show, and let's get started. So before we get all the way in, let me remind you, this is really the last call for Applied AI for Distributor, June 24th and 26th in Chicago. This is the event for distributors for AI. This is not only a group of amazing technology companies that'll help you figure out what your next step is and how they can help you be better with AI, but it's got an amazing lineup of speakers, from Noel Russell to Trent Gillespie, who are global thought leaders when it comes to AI, to a whole host of distributors who have been down this road and are willing to share their story with you and help you understand what the next steps for you are. So Don Sarno, Janet Zelinka, they're coming up with some really award-winning type information for us at this show. We're really excited. And today we've got Tracy. She'll also be one of our keynoters. So we're really excited about the show. It's starting next week. If you're in the area, I would advise get there today. Go to appliedforAIdistributors.com or hit the QR code today. All right, today's show. So we've got myself, obviously Brian Hopkins, Tracy Spangenberg, who's the founder and chief people officer at Tracy Spangenberg LLC, and my good friend and co-host Brooks Hamilton. So we are delighted to talk to you today about AI and what's happening, and we're going to get ready to get started. So welcome to the show, everybody.
Hi, Brian. Hey, Tracy.
Hi, thanks. And sorry for popping in. I didn't know it was like going to be live as I was adjusting, but hey, that's what makes this fun.
That's what live things are all about. It's always fun. Well, I am thrilled to be talking to you guys today because we've talked a lot about AI as an industry, but it's always been around the technology, what department can we put it in? What are the benefits that we can get out of it? How much time is it going to save us? All the technical things around AI. And what we haven't talked enough about, in my opinion, is what about the people impact of all this, right? What's going on in our organizations? And one of the things that I wanted to kind of kick this off and talk to you guys about was this article that I read from Axios. And it really talks about that leadership inertia versus employee pull, right? So employees are saying, I want more, I want to use it. AI adoption by employees has doubled over the last 2 years, but only 20% of executives feel like they're ready or have a plan for what's going to happen with AI in their business. So let's talk about that. What do you think, Tracy, from your perspective, in your experience, where does that hesitation from leadership originate?
It could be, this is my favorite words in HR. It depends. So we say that it depends on so many factors, and I like a lot of information to make a decision, but I think a lot of it stems from risk. So if you're a CEO and you have this, AI isn't new, we know that, but you have this AI revolution over the past 2.5 years or so coming in, and your employees are using it, and you don't know enough about it yourself, or you're getting bombarded on all sides. I think it's a natural tendency to pause and wait and gather a ton of information before you make any decisions.
Yeah, Brooks and I hit this the last time we got together, and it was some of that. I haven't used it myself, so I'm not really sure what to think about this or what to do about it. So what do you think about it, Brooks?
Yeah, I think that there are 3 levels to how to look at AI adoption and also like AI products. So if we think back to like what are the software purchases that we typically have made as companies over the past even like decade, it's all about like departmental level and enterprise level applications. And the whole department's going to get this thing, or our whole company gets teams, all of those. But what we haven't had very much of during that time are like individual apps. Like last time that happened was Office products, like in a major way, and then we got like some SaaS products. But when I think about like the 3 layers of the cake, like you have uh, the enterprise-wide applications like Teams and all, HR software could be. Our next level is departmental. So I'm the pricing organization or the warehousing organization. And then there are apps that are available for individuals. And the really odd thing or interesting thing that's happened is uh, people, employees are working on those individual level apps. So I can now use ChatGPT or Copilot
Mm.
via Microsoft in order to go try out this use case and that use case and kind of experiment around. And that adoption can go really fast. But and it doesn't take very much money at all to go enable a department to go do those things. When we especially contrast that with some of the larger price points that we have for departmental and enterprise level software. So as an exec, the main questions that I'm typically dealing with are like resource allocation questions. So I'm kind of thinking about what should I launch for my department or enterprise? Um, and I can see kind of the hesitation around that because of the price point and
Mm.
to potentially change management. But on the other side, at the individual employee level, boom, they're just racing ahead because there's very little boundary to this, and also the price point is not very high. So I think it's created this like big difference of perspective
Mm.
of risk, familiarity, and then as a result, willingness to adopt.
Yeah, and I don't think there's because the roadmap's not clear, right? It's very clear if you're going to put in an enterprise-wide ERP or you're going to put in some software, there's been a roadmap established for that. There really isn't for this.
Yeah,
And I think that's where maybe some of the hesitation becomes is I don't know how to build it. I don't know what that's going to look like.
I think it's kind of fun. Like you mentioned roadmap, like, okay, ERP, we're first going to go do the financials and then warehousing and then blah, blah,
Right.
blah. And, what happens when you go implement Copilot for everybody or ChatGPT for everybody? And then we're going to go do the what exactly? So we're
Like,
going to go
remember Back to
experiment
the
with this
Future?
thing.
Like, it's like roads, where we're going, we don't need roads. Was that
We
the
don't even
quote,
need
right? Like,
roads.
there's
Yeah.
no roads here.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a really different way of kind of going about how this technology can be used. It reminds me a lot more of advent of the PC as opposed to
Mm.
SaaS, the addition of SaaS software or something else. Or just like there's so much experimentation that's happening out there. It Tracy, I don't know if you've seen this stat or seen something otherwise, but um, I, there was an article that came out, I think it was Axios, that said um, companies are now stepping away from the pilots that they're doing and that they saw a high fail level or a high non-continuation level behind those pilots. And I look at that and like the one way to spin it is, oh, AI is not working, and we're not funding those pilots. But if we contrast that, like Gartner says, if you have a $500 million or $1 billion organization and you're not running 5 pilots with AI, with the expectation of dropping 3 to 5 of those 5, and focusing in just one area, you're not really pushing the boundary. So, when I look at this is like, how does an executive make a resource allocation decision with an unfamiliar technology? You got to play, got to try some things out, you got to experiment, collect some data, and then make resource allocation decisions. So I kind of think that there's this interesting, like, how do you go encourage healthy um, exploration in an organization, maybe in one that hasn't been so familiar with experimenting in this way before. I'm curious if you've run across organizations, Tracy, that have tried to foster some of this.
I think you've got to fail to win, right? And I think that embracing that mindset of failure is really hard in environments where we have razor thin margins. And, what is it going to cost me? Like that's the question. Like a lot of CEOs are like, what's this going to cost me? Okay, we've got 5 pilots going. What's it going to cost us to have that? And what's the cost of failure? Well, then what's the cost of inertia, right? So what's the cost of not doing anything at all? And, my experience has been of some hesitance. I was like, ChatGPT came out and I'm like, this is awesome. Let me get in, let me learn about it. And I wouldn't shut up with my executive team for like 2 years until I left like a year and a half later. Like I would not shut up about it. And they're starting to dip their toes into different facets of AI. And I just saw the potential. And I had my team doing because ChatGPT was free or low cost and in a safe way working with it. But there's still a lot of hesitancy because it's still unknown to a lot of people. It's still, there's still fear.
How did the executive team kind of react to your exploration?
Supportive, but with probably a healthy amount of sighing in between because I love HR tech and I love tech in general. I'm not an expert, but I look at tech as a tool and all kinds of tech. I look at AI as a tool, a
Yeah.
skill that we really need to have in today's environment. And I think anything new, there is some skepticism, as there should be, but coming in and saying to an executive team, we really need to get on this ChatGPT thing, supportive of me playing around. But once I could show some things that it could do and some of the early uses, I think there was more interest there. But still, that was unusual. I think I was pretty unusual in an
Hmm.
HR leader as a chief people officer in the industry back then. I
Hmm.
think that's much more normal now. I'm very curious. So that's like one of the things that you need to have, one of the traits that you really have to have when you're working with AI is that innate curiosity. It's also one of the traits that makes you a good people leader.
That that super makes sense. That might be a great place to talk about like where to begin. I think first question is usually like what is AI? Second question is where can this belong in my business? And then third, it's typically okay, where do I begin? And what I've observed just anecdotally in speaking to these organizations, usually the two teams that I see moving forward most quickly are the HR and marketing teams. They're in maybe somewhat counterintuitively, there are, I think, a lot of use cases to explore there where you can work in the public domain relatively easily. Like, this is going to, from a marketing standpoint, this is content that goes on the site, or here's a new image from an HR standpoint. Where do you see some of the kind of use cases that are a good starting point for HR professionals beginning the AI journey?
I think those two departments make a lot of sense because there are things that could be automated that aren't necessarily automated. And in the HR world, that's something we've been talking about for decades, really. I remember when I started the Granite Group 10 years ago, I came in and we had I talk about this a lot, 50-page new hire packet of paper that was like literally faxed from, this was only 10 years ago, literally faxed from the different locations into HR. And so what I find with my clients and people I talk to now who are maybe in the smaller to mid-size distributor sector, like you don't know what you don't know. And so if you don't know that there's a better way to do things, somebody doesn't come in and tell you, or if you're not attending something like this or coming to the Applied AI for Distributors, you won't necessarily know that there's a better way. And so that, through automating with the tools that were available then, that streamlined things. And now I advise a company called Harriet that I'm going to show a little bit more what they can do at the conference, which is fantastic. And so they automate, and this is a capability that a lot of HR systems have now. They automate questions and answers, or basically put in the hand of anybody, like in your phone, they put a person,
Yeah.
chatbot. I hate using the word chat. It's something like that. And that's a really basic entry level way for HR teams to get used to that. So you load in all of your information, your data, you connect it to all of your systems. And all of a sudden, because we took a really high touch approach at the Granite Group, all of a sudden, instead of getting 30 emails a day and 50 calls a day, somebody can self-service. They didn't have that option before. Hey, how many days left do I have? Can I request time off? Can I do? And all through, like, they're very frontline focused. So all through text. So people who don't have access to their email, people who don't get on. So that's a very easy way, a very accessible way for HR teams to start to automate things and start to dip their toes into AI. And then there's workflow automation. So again, we're seeing a lot of this in HR systems. So, somebody applies for a job, the system screens it. I have my own problems with that. System screens it. We're biased, systems are biased. There's all kinds of bias built in. We're seeing AI interviewers now. We're seeing this throughout the whole life cycle. But what AI can do and do really well is make those workflows better. And now with agentic AI, we're seeing that become better and better and better. So I think HR lends itself naturally to that. I don't think it's the only place, but I also think our profession's filled with curious people, because we're curious about people and we're curious about things and we're curious about systems. So we are probably more likely to be experimenting with AI than other areas of the business.
I find that really interesting. And to me also, like, the use cases you mentioned are in that like departmental level. So I think it sounded like in that one case, I can speed my onboarding and also my regular HR discussions by providing a mobile self-service application that basically is a RAG app that looks down at that data and kind of pulls it back up in a conversational manner. And then you also mentioned kind of automation. How about at the individual level? Like, I think one I've heard is generic. It's the starter of like job descriptions. So I need to post something on, name your job site. I need someone to go get it. How about, those truly beginning steps as an individual within a HR organization, especially if I'm just the one person or two people within the group?
So job descriptions were literally the first thing our team did with AI, right? Because I'm gonna get some pushback for this probably, but you do not need to spend 4 hours writing a job description. You can go to pick your tool, right? ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, and give it the prompts, and then have a really super good job description. And so we move really fast in our world, right? And so done. You got to check it. You have to make sure, but that is a really, really great way to start. I had my team using it as a thought partner. You're going through this challenge, right? Like in this, I still use it like this. Help me think through this issue. So I remember a couple of years ago, I do some things with the BBC once in a while, and I was doing an interview with them, and there was something that I didn't want them to ask me about, and they weren't going to, but what if they did? And so I used I think it was ChatGPT, like, help me work through some responses to if this happens, right? And so I look at AI tools like ChatGPT. I use Perplexity a lot. I mean, that's
Yes.
slightly different, but it's using the other tools because I do a lot of research. But I look at that as, we talk about copilots, and literally there is Copilot, which I like the least, but as somebody kind of sitting right here helping you do your job. I don't use it to write. I can use it to check my writing, to enhance. Nothing wrong with using it to write, but that's kind of my boundaries.
Your line of-
So like, you know,
Yeah.
right, you know your own boundaries.
Yeah.
You use it. I use it as a thought partner. Like I do a lot of moderation of panels, like here's the description, come up with 10 questions, blah, blah, and then kind of refine. So it's like another person who can check your work is the way I look at that.
Yeah.
And so we did a lot of that. You can use it as a coach. You can use it to teach you about these models. So I use that a lot. Like, hey, ChatGPT, I've told people, teach me about you. So
Yeah.
here's the information about
Mhm.
me. Here's where I want to go in my career. Here's where I'm at. What do I need to know? And then walk me through that. And you can make it as small or as big as you want. Talk to me like I'm a middle schooler, a third grader, really simple, basic language. Because when you're dealing with something that's brand new, sometimes that's helpful. So there's an infinite amount of things really, but those are some of the things that I found really helpful on that individual level.
I love that in terms of job descriptions, other probably HR activity. One thing I noticed was writing new policies.
Yeah,
Mhm.
anything like that. Totally. Policies, analysis. I've used this with clients, like here are the engagement scores. Like here's the engagement scores, and most engagement platforms will bake this in, but if you do something homegrown, what am I missing? What am I looking out for? What are the caution areas? What should I do? Or dumping in data and having it help you analyze that. So anything that we do in the world of HR, AI can punch it up another couple levels.
That's encouraging.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
when you saw this, was it usually starting with one person? You mentioned you were leading part of this discussion. Have you seen elsewhere that where it's kind of percolated, the usage of this has percolated organically, or I've seen other cases where a departmental leader or even a CEO has said, hey, there's a prize at the end of the week for whoever comes up with the most interesting use of this. But that was really more as a way of both encouraging the use, but culturally validating that this is okay.
I've heard that as well. I haven't seen it say with my clients, but I've heard that is, it's encouraging people to get curious and, like you said, validating that this is okay for you to do this. I think early on, the Granite Group's response to ChatGPT was to block all access, right? And that was a very common early reaction. We don't know what this thing is, so let's shut it down, like we did many years ago with social media. Like you can't use that on our computers. And as things became more recognized within,
Yes.
not just within distribution, but in general in the media, that relaxed a lot. But there's still companies that don't have AI policies or governance policies or things like that. So before, I know you all talk about that a lot, but before you do anything, I think you have to start there too, like the ethics and the governance and all of that. And if you don't have anything like that in place, like be really cautious with what you're having your people do.
So it sounds like step one is develop a perspective on it
Yeah,
and of how you see it being used in your organization, and then create the policies around what expected usage is and
mhm,
where the guardrails are
right,
in order to communicate that to the organization. So that at least kind of puts another clear direction out
right,
to the workforce of this is how we're going to use it or not.
right.
Yeah, I think it lets people know that it's not cheating. Right? I think
Yeah,
there's some generational issues with that, right? If you're in the 30s and 40s, you're probably thinking this is a great tool. I'm going to use it. It's just as I would use any other business tool.
yeah,
You get a little different generation. It's like, well, wait a minute. I've built my entire career about being an expert in my job.
yeah.
And now I'm going to use this. It feels like I'm cheating a little bit, but it still has to be the mindset of the tool. So I think that's where the leadership gets into play. Like I've built this distribution business for the last 30 years. I know everything about it. versus being able to humble yourself a little bit and say, let me see how this tool would help me be better at it.
I think that's really hard, and it's like anything new. Like, I paid my dues, you should have to pay your dues and you shouldn't have a crutch to lean on. But instead of looking at it as a crutch, it's just a new skill. It's a new tool you have. And if you have something that can help you do your job better and faster and ultimately can potentially help you make more money, why wouldn't you embrace that? And I'm Gen X, and I talk about this a lot. Like, I you know, we didn't have cell phones when I was growing. We didn't have computers. I had to type my college applications on a word processor, and I was lucky I even had those, and I had to do them all individually. And I had to learn all of these things on the way along the way. And we think of the younger folks coming in and, who were born with a phone in their hands and coming in and understanding AI and tech right off the bat. That's great, and that will happen, but it's your people who've adapted, there's something there. Like, everybody is capable of learning AI. This is a little bit different. This is a different time. Like, I think you said, Brooks, like the advent of the personal computer, right? Which I remember. This is like that. This is, no matter what age you're at, no matter where you are in your career, this is a skill that you can learn.
So speaking of skills, it feels like there are a number of skills that are getting and personality traits that are getting exercised as part of this. And I'm curious, as you have people undoubtedly come to you and ask, like, what skills should I look to foster in my organization in order to help that AI engagement or that AI usage, or even kind of like how do I think about how I should begin shaping my workforce as we head into this new technology era?
I think the things that help when you're looking at adopting a wider use of AI are the things that help create a positive culture, right? That notion of curiosity, of caring, but most importantly, above everything else, is trust, and building a foundation, or making sure you have a foundation of trust. Because if people don't trust you, don't trust your leadership, don't trust your supervisors, don't trust each other, then nothing's really going to work really effectively, especially this new thing coming in that they're being asked to adopt. So really starting there with the foundations of creating a positive culture, and a culture that, a culture of innovation, really, that allows for that exploration.
So what would an organization, just like situationally or from a scenario standpoint, want to avoid uh, on the trust side? Or how could they go about either establishing trust as we enter this AI transition, or things that they should avoid on that would cause an erosion of that trust?
I think to a certain degree, you have it or you don't. You can work to do that over time. Leadership and creating, leaders that actually care about their people, that, listen, that are supportive, all of that kind of thing. Hopefully that's in place. And I think in a lot of our organizations, it is in place. I think things that you have to watch out for are, micromanagers, those, brilliant jerks that every company has, that could really, that do their job really well, but just are terrible to people.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
who are, toxic within the workplace. You have to watch out for that, because that can kill any initiative faster than, faster than you would want, right? And one
Yep.
person, one toxic person who's like, this is terrible, if they have influence, then that will fail. And then there's this whole thing about creating the clarity and connection, and creating trust is a whole other conversation, probably for another day, that's not on this program, but there's a lot that you can do to build and maintain trust.
Now, when I think about, some of the trust building, when people hear about AI, AI news is not limited to the C-suite. everybody knows about it. I think there's a fair amount of concern and fear
Mhm.
of what does it mean when my organization begins talking about AI? Um,
I gotta lose my job.
right? How am I going to, at a minimum, how is my job going to be impacted? And probably most concerningly, am I out? Am I done?
Yeah,
And maybe not just done in that company, but for some roles, I think there's an open question of like done, period.
yeah, yep,
Um,
yeah,
so with with fears like that, and then talking about AI innovation, whew, that's a big emotional hurdle to get over in this adoption. So from an exec standpoint, I do understand about being thoughtful and
yep.
cautious in approaching this. But I think, maybe there's a little bit of a difference between being thoughtful and being late to the party.
Yeah, and you have to be thoughtful, and you have to be as transparent. You should be as transparent as you can. And you can look at news articles and find anything you want in there. I'm definitely losing my job. I'm definitely not losing my job. Like, depending on what you read at what time, it's definitely going to impact this sector. It's definitely not. You're going to be fine. And the truth is somewhere in the middle, and we really don't know a lot of it. And I
Mm.
think being as transparent as possible, yeah, we want to learn this. We see the long-term impact as impacting this sector of the workforce, or we're looking at this. So yes, be transparent, but also pair that with upskilling. So one of the things
Yeah.
I talked about with my team, this is just a tiny sample, and this was a few years ago, was like, I want you to have this skill. Like, I want you to understand, and this included people from their 20s to their 60s, right? I want you to understand how this is going to impact the workforce going forward. I want you to be able to use this in your everyday life and at work. I want you to, if you ever are in a situation where your job's impacted, have these skills that you can take with you somewhere else. And that's in the world of HR, this is a huge focus for us, is upskilling. So what are the skills, not of today, but what are the skills of the future? Like, how can we prepare people who their jobs will be impacted by AI? How can we prepare them to run that thing that's going to take their jobs? Or how can we
Right.
prepare them to do something else? And that should be one of the top few focuses of every HR team, and not just for AI, but in general, that upskilling, keeping the people that you
Mm.
have, the good people that you have that are trained in an area, and training them in other areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it shifts that focus, right, from being an HR issue to really being a leadership issue.
It is, yeah,
Right? I think you have to set that tone that just says learning these AI enabled tools and learning about how AI impacts our business is not optional anymore. It's part
no,
of us competitive as a business.
yeah,
And I think it's okay. We talked earlier about transparency. I think it's okay for leaders to say, I think this is what it's going to look like, but I don't know for sure, because none of us know for sure
yeah.
about
I don't
anything.
know as an answer. I don't know as
Yeah.
an answer. It's
Yeah.
it's better than ignoring the question.
Yeah. Because if you had a major strategic shift in your business, you are going to be that's not AI related, right? You are going to be very communicative. You are going to be on town halls, and you're going to be talking to people on cell phones, and you're going to be talking with people individually all the
Right,
time.
right.
To me, this is the same thing. You
Yep.
have to have that same energy, and you have to be out in front of people.
And it will impact your business. You think
Yeah.
about jobs like purchasing agents that it's already being impacted. Think about warehouse functions. We're seeing automation and not necessarily just AI, right? And even marketing to a degree, HR analysts, if we have larger distributors, right? Marketing teams having, and this isn't necessarily a wonderful idea, but it works, right? Like having AI write all their copy, write all their information. That works for some, right? So it's already here and already impacting jobs. And sometimes we see some pullbacks and sometimes we don't, but it's here and it's impacting. And if we get ahead of it, and if we start talking to our companies and our people about that, we're going to build that trust, and we're going to build some measure of loyalty. And, even if we don't know what's ahead, at least having that conversation gets us started down that path.
When you think about like the upskilling, it seems like there are two types of that upskilling that you mentioned. One is, how do I upskill in order to use these AI tools and hopefully oversee a faster, more efficient process? And then there is the other of AI may impact various tasks that people are performing, and that might cause a shift in the role itself, since the tasks are now different. But it also might mean, as you pointed out earlier, that there are not going to be as many people needed in order to go execute the task. So, what else might be needed in the organization that where there is more demand now? But it feels like the identification and then building plans around each of those upskilling types is pretty distinct. Is that the types of discussions that are going on among HR leaders?
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head there. I think that that's exactly what, those paths are what we have to be looking at, and that's what we're talking about. And then we talk about, well, that may change in a year, that may change in 6 months, and we have to revise that all again.
Are those timelines shorter than what you all were working with previously?
No. Yeah, I mean, we've been through this before, and we've seen this, like machinists come to mind, where, anything that now something could be done by a machine was done by a human at some point. So we've seen this throughout the evolution of work, and we've gone through these shifts. And I think what we're seeing with AI is it's that the pace of change is unlike anything that we've seen before. And so we can try to prepare for it, but we don't have any experience with this. Like we don't have any experience with moving quite this fast, and with change moving quite this fast. And a lot of things that we're talking about now, and there's a lot of like, go AI, I'm going to do everything with AI. And then there's a lot of people in the HR world who are like, wait, I don't trust this tool. This hasn't been out so long. I need to, maybe I'll get to trust, but verify. But there's this kind of push and pull of the people who are really, really excited here, and the people who are, and I'm not talking about the afraid, I'm talking, because that's another thing, that's a whole other, there's a lot of people in HR like that. But there's also I'm very skeptical. Is this ethical? What's it going to do to my people? What should we be doing this? Wait. So there's that push, and that's something that is being talked about a lot.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see, like, how do distributors who have kind of gone from, here are the very broad set of products which we offer, to now, hey, I offer differentiation by my service level, and so you should evaluate me on that, to now, oh, we're thinking about adding all of this technology to it. But then what does that mean for my core value proposition of being very service oriented and people first? Ooh, how do I go about combining all of these things?
It's not easy, and we were starting to talk about that, and this is a conversation for sure. We're relationship business. We were a relationship business, as are a lot of distributors, right?
Yeah.
And so when this is a really complicated shift, and not solely AI related, but certainly accelerated by AI. But we're seeing, our main customers were people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, beyond, who are coming in and wanted to come in every day and talk to somebody and place their order over the phone. Or, we eventually got them using e-commerce, right? And then now their kids are taking over, or young people are coming into those businesses because they realize what an incredible, career it can be to own your own business as a plumber, an HVAC technician, what have you, right? And that's the world I came from. And so they're like, I just want to do this myself. I'll place an order online, drop it off to me maybe, or I'm going to order from this company where I never have to interact with anyone. 50% of Gen Z identify as neurodivergent in some sort of way, right? And so I think you guys know this, I'm autistic. And so, you know, for me, which is, I am in the people business and I love it. But for me, if I can place an order and not interact with somebody, great. And we're seeing that more and more and more. And that has a huge impact in our business. And then you throw in AI. And so we have to figure this all out. How do we keep that relationship and embrace this technology while staying true to who we are? And that's not easy.
No, it's really not. And part of like that staying true to who we are, I think about, this is an industry that was built around operational efficiency. That is how you slug it out. And now we're asking, hey, we recognize you've been hiring for operationally great people, but now we also want you to be creative and innovative. Well,
Yeah.
that's not really the hiring profile for a lot of these roles. Like we can say that there's creative problem solving. Zero doubt about that. But in terms of if we contrast that to industries like design, creative arts, like it's a very different profile of creativity level. So, now when I think about what are the skills that I would encourage people to develop and to use in an AI context, for me is like vision and taste um, are really crucial. It's the vision of where do I want to go? Where do I want to take this process or deliverable or outcome? And then what are the incremental steps that I need to manage along that way in order to get the AI to get there? Um, so that's really quite different than how familiar am I with all aspects of the domain? How good am I at creating a white paper or presentation or whatever that
Yes.
might be?
Yeah.
Those are really different ways of thinking.
What can't AI do right now? I mean, we'll see. But what can't it do? You know, it can't be compassionate, empathetic. It can't mimic. I mean, some can probably. By the time we finish this conversation, something may have changed. But
Right.
what are those really essential human parts that can't necessarily be replicated by a machine? And those skills, I hate using the word soft skills, but I'll use it, like those soft skills are more critical. Years ago at Granny Group, we stopped focusing so much when we were hiring branch managers or promoting branch managers internally. We stopped focusing on product knowledge as much as we focused on their people skills. And the results were amazing because you can learn the product, especially now, it's much easier. Teaching someone how to be a good people leader is much, much harder. And so the emphasis is shifting in the industry, and has been shifting for a while, but it's more acutely shifting now. So are you going to hire that person with a vision and with the taste, like you say, with the compassion, with the empathy? Because they'll be able to do the things that are really going to be needed moving forward.
And
We've this, I grew up at Granger, and 20 years ago, they were talking about in coaching leaders as coach. Right. So they had this leadership mantra years ago. But one of the things that is now going to change, right? So if you're a leader as a coach, it used to be, hey, I'm going to coach you how to do this process. I'm going to coach you how to be better at taking an order or asking a customer an additional question. Now it can shift to how are you using the AI tools that are available to you?
Yeah.
It's a very different question now. As a leader, I've got to figure out, okay, I've got to figure out how to coach and counsel my team on how to use these. And so I need to learn how to use them myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we're going to have people coming into these jobs knowing how to do the thing, and the coach becomes, brought in coaching cultures to a couple of different organizations over the years. And That you're right, that whole notion has to shift, but it's going to be, and we've started to do this at Granite Group, like instead of, okay, we do weekly one-on-ones, and this can be for any department. And instead of me asking, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? You're going to work on that asynchronously to the extent possible. Either you have dashboards in the warehouse and it's a parent who's not doing their jobs, or you're, sharing something internally if you're in an office. And then those one-on-ones are focused on career development, skill building, things like that, how those managers can help elevate that. The one of the biggest things we're talking about in the world of HR is personalization, and that's going to be the key between companies who succeed in really having high engagement and a really great employee experience, and those who don't. And this is one of the things that AI really helps enable, because I'm coming into your organization. I want to feel like a person, not a number. And I want a career path that's tailor-made for me. I want, any learning that I do that's tailor-made for me. I want you to interact with me the way I need to be interacted with. I want you to communicate with me the way I want to be communicated with. And that's one of the things that's most exciting to me about, what we're seeing now, is that's possible to an extent, and that's getting more possible. And that's going to be the difference in distributors and in all companies. Like, are you going to be able to attract and retain people? And are you treating them like people? And are you, giving them what they need instead of, here's the job, fit in this box?
Do it.
That's really interesting. I'm curious about the candidate selection process.
Mhm.
And the team that we build, we think a lot of it about how do we select the candidate. There's also, of course, whether the candidate selects us.
Yeah.
Have you heard about any shifts in what candidates are looking for, or if they are asking about things like, do you use AI in your company? Is it allowed? What will I have access to these tools? Or are we beginning to hear those things, or might that just be something in the future, or just that never happens?
That's not a conversation I've heard happen much. I think we're in a very weird market though. Like, some
Mm,
employers are saying, like, I can't find anybody, but it's really hard to find a job for a lot of people in a lot of areas. So it's a really weird place. So I think a lot of job seekers, are just like, I mean, maybe not in warehouses and things and more frontline facing, but certainly in marketing and HR, in product and other areas like that. So it's a really weird spot. So I don't necessarily think we're seeing that yet, but I think a lot of companies are using it. So it's very apparent when you're doing an interview with an AI person is actually happening, which I don't love. But you're doing an interview with an AI person, and it's very apparent how the company feels about AI.
Yeah, I've a personal example. Literally this week, my son did an interview, and he's a personal trainer, so his world is physical, and they decided to have an AI interview him for this role, and he declined the job because of that, right? Because if your first impression of that company is you're being interviewed by an AI tool, then how do you feel about people?
Right.
Right. So it cost them a talented person for something that was probably viewed as, hey, this will be more efficient. We can get through more candidates, and we can get down to 2 or 3 people using this tool, but it turns out to be the opposite effect.
A lot of companies don't put enough thought into, this is an interview. I'm being interviewed as a company too, right? Like, I'm being interviewed as a company. We could talk forever about, like, I was talking to somebody recently who was going through this process and ultimately didn't get the job, but I think it was like 7 or 8 steps in the interview process, which is ridiculous. And, what's that say to the candidate? What's that candidate experience look like? So I look at everything in the work that I do through the lens of the employee experience, from candidate experience to like alumni experience. And that's got to be really positive for you to be successful as a company in attracting and retaining people. And that's not great. Good for your son. That's
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I heard the interview. I heard to hear a little bit, and it was clunky to begin with, but just the idea that you're being interviewed by an AI tool, and I'm a huge AI advocate,
Yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of ways. But for the first impression with a company to start with, it's probably not the way to go.
yeah.
That probably goes back to what you were mentioning earlier, Tracy, about being thoughtful
Yeah.
about how this is being used. Maybe there's a way more than just straight efficiency gains. Um, I have maybe a little bit of a challenging question for you because I don't think I know the answer to this whatsoever. Um, but it is related to what might be very new to some organizations and then probably doesn't exist for the great majority of companies out there. But um, some companies are rolling out chatbots, either for internal use or for their customers to engage with. And there are also some more internal tools of chatbots that are moving up the capability level to more autonomous agent work, where they're taking on tasks that are more complex. Um, and have you all run into like, or even might we think about onboarding those types of tools or capabilities so that they're reflecting the context of the company? And that context might be quite broad in terms of what is the task, department, and culture, even of that organization.
What's your main concern in onboarding? What do you think it would be?
Oh, I kind of think of it as how do I avoid toe stubbing, giant flaming mistakes that are going to become career limiting maneuvers is probably pretty high on my list. And then getting the job done is probably the next one.
Yeah. So I'll give
Well,
you
and
the, no, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say the other side of that is these digital agents don't default to values, right? They mirror the training data.
Yeah.
So that's my question too, and I know it's maybe a surprise question, but it's how do we deal with that, right? Because we want to embed the values of the company in these digital agents, and that's going to be a challenge.
And if agents are making their own decisions, like how do you, so and I know we're going to hear from Noelle, and I'm really excited, and she's
Yes.
a leader in agentic AI. And so that's quite honestly, I'm still slightly afraid. Like most of the use cases I'm hearing for really good agentic AI are make me a, find a restaurant and make me a reservation, book my trip, things that are relatively low risk. When you start deploying it within an organization, I think, you're right to be a little bit more cautious. So I referenced Harriet before. That's essentially, I hate referring to it as a chatbot, but it's not, it's much more than that. But the reason I like something like that is it's, you can ask a lot of questions to whoever's built it or the company and see how they built it behind the scenes. Where are their ethics? And I've looked at a number of different tools, and there are some that are just like straight up built on ChatGPT and not really trained at all, and not really stripped of bias and all of that. And so I think you onboard anything like that with a lot of caution, and you check things 8 million times. And I know from talking to the folks at Harriet and other companies too, like people have a lot of questions. And, if you have a company that is deploying an AI tool like this, you better have a lot of answers. And I'm an inherently skeptical person, and there are some AI tools I would deploy without hesitation. And there's some where I'm a little bit more cautious. And I think, is there an onboarding protocol for AI agents? There will be, if there isn't now. Like
There has to be. You almost have a digital performance review too, right? I mean, you have performance review people.
Yeah.
There's got to be a process that you build that you digitally look at that tool and give it a performance review. What's working, what's not, and what needs to be different.
Lattice did this,
That's
I think,
a weird one.
last year. They started calling their AIs people, and they started treating, and then they very quickly, they got so much pushback, they pushed back on it.
Yeah.
So, treating agents like people, maybe not, but again, you give vendors reviews, or you fill out surveys or questions, right? Like, and that's like any process. You iterate, you go through, you look at it. How is it performing? You fix the things that are broken. You go through that again, and again. And we have to do that. We have to do that with AI.
Tracy, I have a last question for you before we wrap it up. This is going to definitely fall into the category of creative, innovative, fun, and we're not holding anybody to this, but it's kind of looking at over the next, say, 5 years or 10 years, kind of pick your time frame. How might we expect organizational structures to change? And where I'm going with this is I've heard about some what I would think of as like rather radical things. Like Klarna said, hey, we are actually now going to have our technology team report to our HR leader because we are pushing so hard on agentic. We recognize that we're going to go through massive process and change management activity, and we feel like our human resources team is best organized to manage us through that process, and the technology team is going to enable it.
Yep.
Have you heard about other things that are like caught your eye? Like, whoa, that's interesting.
First of all, I love that. And that is happening in more than just Klarna. Like, I think that is maybe not a broad trend, but somewhat of a tiny trend to see, because, finally HR's capabilities are being seen, right? And I don't love comparing AI to COVID times, but sometimes it's going through things that nobody's seen before, really, that kind of shine a light on the capabilities of some departments like HR that can do things that didn't get a chance to shine before. So I love that. I think that's going to change. When we all talked not too long ago, we talked about the ever-changing nature of work, and we're at a point now where, and this is the biggest thing I think we're going to see, work as we know it is not going to exist in 5 years. I mean, work is going to be here, but gone are the days, probably in less than 5 years, where you can say this job is 7 to 4, Monday through Friday, and be here or else. Because, I left the job market to start my own business because I wanted to have a life that I designed myself. And I'm 52. And we're seeing kids seeing their parents do this. And we're seeing kids go like, I don't want to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week for 40 years and then die. Like, that's not what I want. So this whole notion of the world of work is changing. I think in 5 years, certainly in 10 years, we're going to see a very different workplace. And I don't think as distributors, we're quite ready. And I love talking about this, and I'll talk about this more next week, but we're going to see a massive shift in how people want to work.
That's fascinating insight, Tracy. And I think that also brings in something that I certainly hadn't considered before, which are how have some of the experiences of COVID shaped the expectations and perceptions of some of our younger generations, and how is that then going to show up once it combines with the AI technology, job change and process changes that are going on. That's going to be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about it.
Looking forward to hearing about it next week.
All right.
Yeah, that's the next time we're going to see Tracy, next week at the Applied AI for Distributors show, where we're going to take a couple of weeks hiatus between the show and 4th of July. But Tracy, thank you so much for spending the time. I mean, we can't spend enough time talking about the people impacts that are going to happen to us over the next 4 to 5 years. So I'm glad you got to spend some time with us today.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Brooks.
All right.
And we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Tracy.
Bye.
Yep.
A lot of fun.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks.